as folks are coming in, and if I can ask those in the back, just kind of get a little closer here. We certainly do not. That's right, that's right. And it's just like church, you know, no one wants to sit in the front, all sit in the back, and so it looks like he has carried on from the church to Spring Arbor University. So yeah, as we give folks to move close to the front, we're going to start this event off. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to allow Dr. Rupert to come and share some things, and then I'll kind of give a little bit more background about why we're here and why we're here. We're gathered together to commemorate and to remember what has been done through the years concerning African American History Month or Black History Month. So with that, we're going to allow our provost to come and to have some words. So let's give her a hand as she comes, Dr. Rupert. Where's the excitement? Come on! There we go.
Don't do that. You see, that's what happens if you encourage kids who haven't done anything by telling them they're wonderful. They won't think they have to do anything to be wonderful. Okay? So I appreciate it, nonetheless. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl and African American history. Okay. I did not watch the game last night. I have to admit that I don't have cable, but I certainly heard a lot about it on the way in this morning. The interesting part about the game, well, there are a lot of interesting parts, but one of them is that the Eagles have not won a Super Bowl since 1960. They have had a lot of disappointments, but they have hung in there. They have persevered. Do you know that the Eagles, for 4 decades, have been in the top 3 franchises for attendance in the NFL? For 4 decades. And they have sold out every single game since 1999. Home games and away games. Okay. Now, what is the parallel between that and African American history? I went to a conference this past week with a group of folks from Christian schools. There were 1,200 people. And one of the topics was the issue of resilience. And they said the problem we've got with a lot of young people today is everything has been easy. And as a result, they have no resilience. The actually the word is grit. Well, the wonderful thing that African American history teaches us is this is a community with resilience. This is a community that has suffered trials and tribulations. And Scripture tells us, 1 John says, your trials produce perseverance, and perseverance produces maturity. And Paul tells us in Romans that tribulation produces patience, which produces experience, which produces hope. And that hope is not disappointing because our hope is in Christ. So that grit, that perseverance, which would make the 40-year run or whatever it is, for 70, I guess, for the Eagles to be nothing, because the African American community has been showing grit for, almost 500 years? That's a great tradition. Now, I really appreciate some of the posters that are over in the community center, in the student center, of persons who have accomplished great things. That's like the quarterback. It's wonderful. It doesn't take away anything from the individual accomplishment of the quarterback, but he's got a team behind him, and he's got a fan base behind him. So the great accomplishments that we recognize and we appreciate come out of a community of perseverance that really provided the basis on which some of those accomplishments arise. My favorite story in that regard is Ben Carson's story about his mother. You probably know this. She required her boys to do a weekly book report. She wanted that book report every week because she wanted them to accomplish something. And it was only many, many years later that they discovered she could not read. But she was determined that they would know how to read, and they would be persons of accomplishment. That's grit. That's perseverance. That's the support of the community. What's the game? In the Super Bowl, you can tell what the game is. What is the game? It is to be a significant part of the community where you are. to be reconciled, but in the sense that you are collectively stronger, that you have an opportunity to contribute what you have to your country, and that it's a situation in which each person made in the image of God has all the opportunities in this world to become everything that God intends him or her to be. That comes about in the gospel, and we need to be able to demonstrate that. There's a wonderful book called Unified, which was produced by Trey Gowdy, who is a congressman from South Carolina, and Tim Scott, who is an African American senator from South Carolina. They came in as freshmen in Congress, met each other. I think there were more than 100 freshmen, so they just happened to get together. Decided, since they were from South Carolina, they really should meet and talk. They discovered they were both from Christian colleges, brothers in Christ, and therefore they decided that whether they really got along or not, they needed to. So they made it a practice to have dinner 2 or 3 times a week in Washington, D.C. when they weren't home with their families. And just to talk and to listen to each other and to work through whatever issues were of concern that were brought up in Congress or things going on in the public. And as a result of that, they have an amazingly strong friendship. And that friendship enabled them to bring resources into the situation of the shooting in the Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina. It's a wonderful story of reconciliation, building community, enabling people to flourish in a situation that otherwise could have exploded and been very, very bad. It's the communication that was successful. So that's the game. The game is, how can Spring Arbor University be an example, a community, a city set on a hill, a bright place where everybody can flourish, especially in Christ. How do we accomplish that? Well, we know we got the grit, we know we got the perseverance, and that's what the Eagles had. What was the difference last night? And Bill Belichick, who is the coach of the Patriots, says the difference was coaching. He messed up. It's not that the Patriots didn't have grit and determination, but they didn't get the right coaching. So they didn't go in the right direction. Whereas the Eagles had the right coaching. So tonight we are privileged to have a coach who's going to tell us how to listen, how to communicate, how to win the game, how to come together as a community and be a model for our Spring Arbor University community and for the broader world, and out of that community with grit and perseverance to produce the next generation of MVPs. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Rupert. Thank you for that moving NFL civil rights story. Certainly tonight we do have a great speaker here. Tonight certainly he's very capable. He's been in these kind of venue, done a lot of presentations about obviously Black History Month, as well as just a mentor, a professor. He's done quite a bit in the community, as well as in his time in Vegas. He's a Vegas man, and so he's come certainly to encourage us on tonight and to share some of his research that he has done over the years at MSU as well. He is a professor at Michigan State University. Before we bring him up, I just want to kind of remind us a little bit, those of you that may not be aware, Spring Arbor has put together a number of activities for the month of February in honor of Black History Month or African American History Month. And so part of that is to kind of share some of that with you guys. I know Dr. Rupert mentioned what we have in the Student Center. I don't know, have most of you seen what's in the Student Center? All right, I see a lot of amens out there. All right. And so as you walk throughout the building, I know some people are like, oh, these are like 5 things. It's actually peppered around the entire building. So if you walk around, you'll see a lot of different pictures that we have out there to, again, as she mentioned earlier, to commemorate a lot of the accomplishments that were put forth in American history by African Americans down through the years, as well as, I would say, I call these individuals, as well as other abolitionists, those that have stood for the rights and the advancements of African Americans may not necessarily have been African American or blacks themselves, but saw the need and were compelled to step forward and to fight for what is right. And so we do have individuals like B.T. Roberts, who is the founder of the Free Methodist Church. Certainly he was an abolitionist, a man that stood for what is right, a man that stood for the righteousness of God and didn't believe in slavery. And so obviously that's one of the reasons why he made the move to start the Free Methodist Church organization. We also have individuals like Otis Howard. I'm not sure if most of you have heard of Howard University. Have heard of Howard University? Howard University was actually started by a white man. And so I know a lot of people are like, what? Really? Are you serious? You know, although Howard University is a historical black college, Otis Howard was one of the leaders that helped to start that movement. And so in fact, he was a man that believed that after slaves were free, they needed to be given a transition process or a transition opportunity to grow and to make something of themselves in this free world that they were in. And so part of that movement, he was involved in helping to educate. And so part of the education process or institution that he started was Howard University, where free men could be educated to have an opportunity to become great in the American society. We have others, if you look throughout the Student Center, you will see all the different pictures. Please take the time to stop, read the caption, see what it says and what makes that person so significant in the African American movement and the advancement of the African American community. We also have other events happening throughout the month as well. The Old Settler, we have the theater department representation here. So they will be, yes, please give a shout out to the theater folks. So they have, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 events happening, or the play Old Settler, which is about an African American family. So the theater department will be putting that on Tuesday, February 20th through the 25th, which is Sunday. So really a 5-day deal here. So it's pretty exciting to kind of see that. I'm looking forward to seeing how that's going to play out. And also on the 24th, which is spoken word jam. It's definitely art, poetry, art, all those things together, music. And then the last one will be Soul Night, will be happening on the 25th. That's a Sunday night. So all these obviously will be on the app, but you can certainly pick these up before you leave as well. Kind of gives you a little bit of background of what's happening and different lineups that the institution has sponsored to honor the legacy and history of African Americans. All right? And so with that, we're certainly not going to delay the time because we know that Dr. Renshaw has prepared a very awesome presentation. So with that, I'd like to certainly introduce him. He's a good friend. Dr. Renshaw has been on this campus actually multiple times. This is his second time presenting here. I think he presented about 4 years ago. He was a panelist at one of our racial reconciliation panel discussion we had back in 2015, 14, I think it was. He was a panelist on that. And then he's been on campus a couple of different times when Ambassador Andrew Young was on campus to speak. He was part of that entourage and come and support. And so he's kind of familiar with Spring Garden University and what we stand for, what we're all about. Aside from being a great professor, he is first and foremost a Christian. And so I appreciate that about him, working at a state school representing Christ in the classroom and what he does. And I think a lot of time we don't really talk about that or don't really magnify that among academians who are working at state school. Typically we'll talk about their research and their accomplishments, but he certainly is a man that's not shy about representing Christ on Michigan State University campus. So with that, let's please give Dr. Renshaw a hand as he comes to share with us.
Thank you. It's his theme music, so.
Actually, love this song. All right, can everyone hear me? I'm going to, I don't actually think I need the mic, but sometimes I think the mic helps for the camera, so I'll just talk on the mic, right? So, Wow, after that great introduction, I don't think I have anything that I can say better than that introduction, so I think we should just go home. Well, since I'm here, we'll talk a little bit. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you hanging out on a very cold evening. So I was thinking about a nice segue. Because of time, I'm going to not do a really large introduction or background about myself. I'm going to talk about myself as we go through the presentation. But to make a really short background, when I was in Las Vegas, before I came here, I had a mentorship program. And I was teaching a black masculinity class when I was at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So while I was there, we had a gentleman who was a guest speaker. He came in, did a really good job. And then all of my male students volunteered to help go with him to a school. So we started a masculinity class, excuse me. We went right into a mentorship program within 2.5, 3 weeks later. So we wound up having, I think for 2 years, we had 4 mentorship programs at 3 schools. The first one that we did was for African American males. The second one was African American Latino males. The third one was girls of color. And then we did another mixed of some girls and boys. So we had 4. And because I did that, there was a lot of outreach going on. And so when I was doing all that while I was working on my doc. And that had nothing to do with my doc, it was just work that I was doing because, well, you know, guest speaker came to class and all my students wanted to volunteer in the school, so you follow your students and there you are. So partly why I'm here is because of my students inspired me. So I got hired at Michigan State because they needed an outreach specialist and to work with black males. So I was the achievement gap specialist for black males, and then it was black males and Latino males, and then I was the achievement gap specialist for males of color. So that's what I did. That's how I got to Michigan State, originally from Las Vegas, as you mentioned. So what does that have to do with the segue to the NFL? Well, Las Vegas is about to get a really good sports team. You may have heard of the Raiders. Okay. Anyway, for those of you who are sports fans, the Raiders are coming to Vegas. But while I was doing outreach and I was working with black males, there was a thinking behind it. It was like, wow, black males, they not really doing very well. Males of color aren't doing very well, and they can't learn, they have lots of trouble. And I said, well, that's not true. That's not true. He said, well, they're not doing well, they don't do well with white teachers. I said, well, that's not true at all, because black males typically have a white coach, and that white coach can get those black males to do whatever they want them to do, right? Including if you don't do well in the classroom, you don't play for the team, grades go up. So it is possible for white teachers to teach black males. And you're like, well, so what? What's the big deal? So what is the key behind sports and black males and getting them to achieve in school? Because black males like playing sports because there are clearly defined rules. They're part of the team and they have support. So those thinkings is what leads us to going into reconciliation. So that's my little segue, right? Sports, right? Okay, so the gentleman that you see in the middle of this photo is my mentor. It's a guy named Dr. Robert Green. He was a guy that I mentioned earlier who inspired my students to start the mentorship program. You might see that guy on the right there. That's Dr. King. That was actually taken at the Lansing Airport. So Dr. Green was a professor, dean emeritus at Michigan State University, and this was back in the days before cell phones. So he had to stop and use telephone, and so that's taken right here at the Lansing Airport. So more about Dr. Green a little bit later. So a funny story, a friend of mine, her daughter was really bugging her. This is about maybe 6 years ago, really bugging her to get a cell phone. Cell phone, I gotta have a cell phone. You don't need a cell phone. I need a cell phone. Oh, my cell phone. Cell phone. She's like, how old were you when you got your first cell phone? She was like, 35. And I was like, ah. So anyway, there was a time in history when there were no cell phones. All right, so what we're gonna do today, we're gonna talk a little bit about, I was supposed to talk a little bit about reconciliation. And one of the key components to reconciliation is reconciliation can't occur unless there's healing. So we're going to talk a little bit about healing, right? And that's going to lead us into our reconciliation. So a couple things to talk about today. As we go along, we're going to stop a couple of times. You're going to get to know someone next to you. You're going to have a brief conversation, report out, and we're going to move on. But to begin, we're going to have some norms, right? So norms is everything that we do so we're all on the same page. So the first norms is ours. The first one of the norms are, I should say, practice my correct speaking, is we're going to maintain a model of learning disposition. That means it's okay to ask questions, right? That's important, especially when we're talking about this type of work. We're going to support each other in understanding the intent for healing transformation. We're going to be present. I get distracted a lot, like about my friends and their daughter. We're going to provide constructive feedback. We're going to trust the process. We're going to maintain a respectful disposition. Be aware of airtime. That means not talking too much. Allowing everyone to participate. Courtesy check. That means checking in with yourselves as you go along. If we're talking about something that's really heavy, it's a lot of emotion, you're welcome to walk out, have a seat in one of the couches over there, sit back and relax. Or something that's also important, you need to use the restroom. Use the restroom. How many of you know where the restrooms are? One there. Okay, cool. Very good. All right. I always get to know where the restrooms are. Restrooms and exit signs, two most important things when you go to a new place, right? So that's the courtesy check. We're going to minimize sidebar conversation. So if we're going to talk, we're going to make sure that we talk about the topic that we're on for that particular moment. And checking in with yourself, courtesy check, go together. And you're going to mute and turn off your cell phone. So that's me too. Muting. Everyone okay? Everyone agree to those? All right. Excellent. So, we'll move on. So one of the things that by the way, my background, my PhD is in curriculum instruction, which is actually putting together curriculum and teaching, choosing a textbook and making sure everything goes right in the classroom. That's what my degree is. It's not what I've done since I've been here, but that's what my degree is. But one of the things that we do, and that's part of checking in too, make sure you have your refreshments. So that's a good idea. Right? So one of the things, refreshment time. So feel free to take care of yourself. Yeah, I don't mind if you eat while I'm talking. I don't have any problems with that at all. Because I would eat if you were talking. So one of the things that happened when I got here, since I had some community outreach, keep in mind I wasn't focused on community outreach. I was just following my students, and we wound up having a mentorship program. So that's how I got into this work. So now I'm like an outreach specialist type of thing. But anyway, so one of the connections that I made was a lady named Angela Waters Austin. She does a program called One Love Global. Angela Waters Austin has about 3 or 4 smaller organizations that she works with. But she just got a, I think, $3 million grant from the Kellogg Foundation dealing with truth, racial healing, and transformation. So I just happened to have gone through some workshops like this when I was asked to talk about reconciliation. I was like, man, how did that happen? So that's an example of you go where he wants you to go, right? So he wanted me to go here. So with truth, racial healing, and transformation, one of the things we're going to be talking about is their primary goal is to end the hierarchy, or the end of the idea that there's a hierarchy of race. And so to end that idea, to make that happen, there we go. I'm going to introduce something to you, a new idea. It's called cognitive justice. So this is going a little bit beyond the TRHT and the Kellogg. Cognitive justice, put simply, is making everyone's ideas and ways of thinking equal. And one of the ways this happens is to allow yourself to learn from someone else. So the lady who developed, or who introduced me to this idea, her name is Dr. Hopper, and she is from South Africa. And she talks like this, and she has a really nice voice. And as she's talking to you, you hear the drums of Africa, and you get into it, and she's so deep and intense. So I'm going to use her accent so we stay on top, okay? So cognitive justice is the conscious act of acknowledging and embracing multiple ways of thinking and treating individual ways of knowing equally is called cognitive justice. It allows diverse people to be experts in their own lives, informed from their own sense of being based on their unique cultural and experiences. Cognitive justice requires establishing new education and apprising criteria. I like this. Isn't this pretty cool? And she was telling me this with her South African accent, and I was like, ooh, you felt that heartbeat of the motherland. I was there. So this is one of the ways she does. So she does this in South Africa. She gets universities together. I think she said she had around 630 universities getting together. This is the first thing she did. She got everyone together in the room, and she says, let's focus on something. What does water mean? Pretty deep, huh? So if you're dealing with people from different places around the world, discussing water means something different in different places, right? So water definitely means something different to us here in Michigan than it means in other places, right? Not just with Flint, but just think about this. We're the clean water state, but we don't have clean water. But it's not just in Flint, it's in Detroit and some of the suburbs of Lansing, right? Isn't that amazing? All right. So water is a significant way to get people all on the same page. So she tries to get indigenous doctors and Western doctors together in the same room to acknowledge each other's experiences equally. How cool is that? In Hawaii, they have traditional hospitals, but in every traditional hospital in Hawaii, they have a healing room where you can go and seek any other type of modality that you like in everyone. How cool would that be? Right, so cognitive justice is something that's going to frame our thinking as we go along together. So, I got into this work. Let me give you one other thing here. One way of using cognitive justice is to allow everyone's individual artifacts to play a role. Okay. So this is an artifact. It's called the kente cloth. Right? Black History Month kente cloth. I'm actually practicing for the Black Panther movie that's about to come out. How many of you are excited about that? I got the first tickets for the first show in Lansing at 7 o'clock. Not on the 18th when the movie comes out, but the day before, the 17th. So I'm really excited about that. So very quickly, I wanted to take just 2 or 3 minutes. I want everyone to look at these words that we have up here. Race, racism, discrimination, community, and reconciliation. Everyone just take 2 minutes to think about these words. What is your definition of these words? 2 minutes seems like it's a long time, but it may not be enough. and time. So the first word up is race. Who would like to share out their definition of race that we will use to conceptualize our conversation today? She's like, don't look at me. Who would like to share? Now keep in mind, this is going to be a safe environment. What you say may not be wrong, may not be right. But we're going to talk about some words so that we have the same terms when we have a conversation. How many of you have been in a conversation with someone and they said one word, but they used it in a different way than you were thinking of it, and it just messed up everything? Well, does that mean how we started the conversation? You're like, right? So we're going to try and erase that cognitive dissonance and go with cognitive justice, right? So we use the same terms. Because I've heard people use all the words up there differently in different ways, and sometimes I don't even know what to say. So who would like to give me their conceptions of the word race? Yes, sir.
I was trying not to say, I was trying to give folks a chance, but I guess they're like, Eric. I see all the eyes coming at me, so I guess I need to speak. My understanding of race is, for me, it's a cultural and phenotypical identification of a particular group or person.
So is race ethnicity? Is it origin? Is it skin color? Is it your height? Is it your gender? What would you think my ethnicity is? African American? You know, I actually don't identify as African American. I identify as black. We'll come back to that word. And I also identify, I'm more British black than I am African American. So my dad was in the Air Force. I lived in the UK. And in the UK, I wound up drinking tea. I like tea more than coffee. All right, yeah, so these guys laughing at me already. How many black guys you know drink tea?
I love tea.
Oh, okay. Oh. So I like tea. I learned how to ride English style before I learned how to ride American style. I played soccer before I played football. I played cricket before I played baseball, right? And I like to cook. So one of my really good descriptions is I was in this grocery store one time and I was wandering around and I'm like upset again. Man, where, man, this ain't man from Reston. This place don't have any capers, man. I can have a grocery store with no capers, man. I'm like looking and I was like, I'm a black man in a white grocery store looking for capers. I am not an African American male at all. All right. So I'm way more British than I'm African American, right? But the second thing, I had a student of mine, she says that she identifies with black as opposed to African American because black means poor and she wants to inherit and keep her poorness. Direct quote. I've never identified with black as being poor, but she considers people who consider themselves African American being bougie. Her words, not mine. Not saying she's right, not saying she's wrong, but that's an example of. Now here's one. I got my mother a DNA test. My mother likes Maasai. She has all these Maasai figurines around the house. My mother wants to be Maasai. I said, let me get her a DNA test for Christmas. She gets the DNA test, and right, and after, she's like, what? She's like, she's not Maasai. How'd you know? I just rubbed my nose. So I'm like, so my mother, like, after the first month, well, Teddy, I didn't get back. After 3 months, well, Teddy, you need to get your money back. They didn't get your, my mother's tough, yeah, just being funny. So after the 4th or 5th week, it gets results back. Guess what? My mother is Eastern European. So my mom's side of the family, their last name is Carroll. My grandfather's side of the family is Wilson. So I'm pretty much either Irish or Scottish. And yes, I'm going to get and wear a kilt. I've ever seen the look on white folks' faces when I walk in with a kilt and I sit there. And I'm like, who's this? And I'm pull out my sheet, say, boom! I'm Scottish. all you immigrants have to leave. Okay, so race. I didn't necessarily think we were going to nail race, but let's talk about this one. Racism. What is racism? Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself now. I have a big problem dealing with how people define racism and how people define discrimination. I'm having a difficult time dealing with that. Who would like to tell me their idea, what they think racism is? Yes.
I would say like any hatred against like a group of people who have something.
Hatred of a group of people who have the same or who have similarities. Okay? We don't work with that. Anyone else have something that they would like to offer or share an opinion? Yes.
I feel like judgment of different skin colors.
Judgment of different skin colors. Okay. Don't see another hand. Yes, sir.
Hatred amongst a certain group due to their racial origin.
Hatred of a certain group due to their racial origins. Good. Your hand moves, sir.
I was going to try to broaden it a little bit and say the conscious or unconscious perspectives against someone who's not like me.
Conscious or unconscious perspectives against someone that is not like yourself. We got some heads nodding. Your hand moved. You moved your hand though. No scratching.
Just in agreement with me.
Yes. I'm allowing everyone to have equal airtime. You don't have to respond if you don't, but I just want to make sure I'm allowing space.
Well, I agree with you.
Okay, he agrees. Okay, agreement. Okay, so what's discrimination?
Treating people differently based on that.
Treating people differently based on your views of race or racism?
It can also
Talking about racism.
it can also be based upon sexuality or gender or region.
Race, sexuality, gender, or reason. Anyone else has something how they would like to define the talk about racism? Yes.
When I think of discrimination, I think of belittlement, and what's the word I'm looking for? All I can think is compensation. That's not the word that I'm thank you. Condescending.
So she's talking about wet attitudes.
Exactly. Yeah, and stereotypes.
Okay, stereotypes. Okay, so it's too late. I asked you already, man. You said, yes, sir. I'm just messing with you. Yes, sir.
I say like judging people like the way they look on the outside, like not just like specifically ethnicity, but like people judge like the LGBT community, like just judging others because they're sort of different or different.
That's excellent. You really get to how to matter. So, with that in mind, what's the difference between racism and discrimination?
Racism is more specific upon.
Say that again, sir.
I say that racism is more specific towards your understanding of a certain racial group versus discrimination is a lot more broad. And in discrimination, you could, at the same time, I'd say it, be that guy that defines the word with the word. You can also discriminate a person based upon their race, also upon their style, also upon how they carry themselves, also upon how they talk. Whereas racism, you discriminate a person just because of they're a certain race, or they're a certain type of people that you have a negative stereotype or understanding of.
Yes.
I see it as a difference in attitude and action. A closet racist is hard to be a closet discriminator.
Ah. So can you discriminate without being racist? You don't have to answer that. You can answer your question when we come back.
I'd say discrimination has to do with opportunity.
Discrimination has to do with opportunity. Okay, so can you discriminate without being racist?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, you discriminate without being racist. Absolutely. Because discrimination against ethnic groups you somewhat touched on. for me, it's a preconceived, it's a prejudice or a approach based on a preconceived idea about a particular person or groups of people. And so it's based on one's perspective on another group or another person. So in which you touch anything, race, sexual identity, as you mentioned, style, height, I mean, whatever, you know, you can discriminate based on whatever my preconceived ideas come from.
Let's move right along. What is, we're going to keep all of these, pin all these ideas. We're going to go along, keep moving along. What is the definition of community? Sir?
I would say like being welcome into everyone.
Okay, being welcome to everyone. Your definition of community. Unified with one goal. So this is going to jump around right around to the next one. So then what is reconciliation? What's the difference between reconciliation and community? Yes.
We talked a little bit about this when we were doing it, but I heard someone explain reconciliation as instead of problem solving, problem healing. And the community is your group of people who come from all different places, who have all kinds of different stories, and the goal is to solve problems so that you can live peaceably. But if you're a community of reconciliation, it's to heal those problems so that you can see them.
Are any group professors here? Okay. Yeah, she needs to get an A. All right. That was excellent. Okay. So I'm not obfuscating. I'm moving along because I think one of these words might come back. All right. We're going to do a few small group exercises. I'm going to tell you how I got to this word. So when I got here, Michigan, shortly after when I got here, the Trayvon Martin incident happened, and I was like, what are we going to do to help support teachers in the classroom who are dealing with black males and other students in the class that may be depressed? So looking at all this research about depression and how do you recognize signs of depression and all of these things, to help the black males, right? And what I found out was all of the symptoms people look for to see if someone is depressed are the same symptoms or the same behaviors in the classroom the black males get suspended and expelled for. Being quiet, being disengaged, keeping your head down. Oh my God. Oh my God. If you're a black male in the United States, how can you, this is before Trayvon Martin, how could you not be depressed? Right? Just walking in the door. I can see you not wanting to be in the classroom, head down, disengaged. Right? It's like, that's a whole different way of thinking. So as I go along, about 4 or 5 months ago, started looking at some YouTube videos. I like to watch YouTube videos, and I usually watch the lectures. Okay? Do a lot of reading, so I kind of balance my professors. We have to read a lot of stuff. So I balance it by listening to lectures. So this guy was doing a lecture, this guy named Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has this really, really good analysis of when he talks about depression. He says when he's a clinical psychologist. Dr. Green that I showed you, my mentor, he's also a psychologist. He messes with me all the time. And I see him mess with other people all the time, right? But he messes with me all the time. My mother is also an education, ed psych. Right? So I've taken a lot of psychology tests. I'll come back to that. Because when she has a postgraduate degree, to get your degree, postgrad, you have to administer your test to practice. In other words, you have to find guinea pigs to practice taking tests on before they let you out in the real world. So I've taken almost every psychology test that there is because she's my mom and I had to take the test. Right? And so going back to Jordan Peterson, we'll come back to my mom in being crazy. I mean, back to my mom, I'm not really crazy. Except after my mom had me, she had no more children, but I don't know what that means. But Jordan Peterson said, when someone is depressed, it's very difficult to tell the difference between if someone is really depressed because of things are coming at them. He says life is hard in general, or are they depressed because they have low status? Right? And so and I was like, that's deep, huh? So what's the connection? Well, if you have low status, everything is a stressful situation. Having a flat tire when you have low status ruins everything, right? Because if you're low status and you have a flat tire, that means you may not be able to get the tire fixed. That means you're more likely to live in a neighborhood where the bus may or may not come. Having a flat tire 15, 20 minutes late for work, having low status means you may not have a job ever again in that particular spot, right? Whereas if you have high status, a flat tire, if you're a father, I have my daughter pick me up. I'll borrow my son's car, or my wife's car, or my neighbor next door. Or I know a buddy who owns a tire shop. He can just fix it for me right away. Or I know a guy at an automotive store. Or the buses run in that neighborhood. Low status, that something as small as a flat tire is extremely stressful when you're low status. So how do you tell the difference between low status and being depressed? Does one come before the other, or is one the next? So one thing that they do to diagnose what's really going on, they ask you questions about your family. Now, I was always under depression. They ask you questions about your family to see if you had Opus Rex syndrome or Opus syndrome or whatever the syndromes are. You love your mother or you hate your father, all of those things. They're trying to see what your family connections are, to see what your relationships are, right? To see, do you have a family support network? That's some of the questions that they ask, right? So, status, depression. People don't like it when you change their status. Okay? Well, skipped ahead, my apology. So there's this book by this guy named Ernestine and Mary. He wrote something called The Bell Curve. Bell Curve was an extremely controversial book. It came out when I was a kid. I remember the conversations when this book came out. People went livid. In short, the Bell Curve says that if you do an IQ test, which is an intelligence quotient, right? Quota. That means if you take 100 over 1,000, but we'll stick 100 because it's easier to work, even though it's an extra zero. It's actually the same thing. Out of 100 people, the majority of the people who think like this and who think like this are in some certain categories. IQ tests are more than 60% accurate. How many things in life do you know that are more than 60% accurate? IQ test is a really good indicator of how well you will do in school, what type of jobs that you are likely suited for, and your life outcomes. Deadly accurate. Like, deadly accurate. And so, based on that, from this book, The Bell Curve, what the Bell Curve talks about is that the people who are on top of the IQ level, the top Asians, East Asians, Jews, whites, people of black descent are on the bottom, Latinos are just above them, all the way around the globe. That's not how I got into this book. I heard about this book and I heard about all this stuff. I got into reading this book and paying attention to this book because this guy, Ernestine, was doing a report because they revised the book. And people were going, well, that's racist. We're all the same intelligence, right? But if you look at outcomes across the globe, those racial ethnic identities are usually higher on the scale than not. So some folks have said, so that makes the bell curve and the research they did behind the bell curve racist. Now, to be fair, they did a bunch of chapters. This is only like a paragraph towards the end and the back at the end. What is racist? So this guy, Ernstein, went through and what they call control. That means he took each of the problems that people said was with the research and they fixed it, redid the test, same thing happened again. All the results were identical. It is so identical that he reproduced the test for people of African descent in South Africa by folks who were grad students, gave them unlimited time, and even had the test proctored by people who spoke their language. IQ scores in South Africa, IQ scores in the United States, and IQ scores all around African Americans or people of black descent are lower from the same level all the way across the globe. Whereas, even, make sure I get this correct, I think it's the Vietnamese or Korean children who were adopted before the age of 2 by people, I think in Switzerland, their IQ of the IQ of the children was exactly the same as the place that they had left. So you can't make the argument that environment plays a role. Right? So what does all this have to do with anything? So the next thing that popped into my mind is I saw a video about folks who are recruiting to the alt-right. There's a big movement in the United States around white women who are frustrated and surprised and disappointed because their sons come home listening to alt-right and they think, oh my God, me being a liberal white woman out there trying to make change, how can I have racist children? So if you look at the alt-right, how do they attract these males? You are somebody. You come from a great heritage. Stand up for yourself. Be a man. And there's a girl in the background with the hair flowing. You come from greatness. Don't let them take that away from you. Stand up. Stuff the guys like to hear. Nothing about race. Nothing about race. Right? So they catch these millennial males, guys who stay home, watch video games, right? Don't go out. Why? They're afraid to talk to girls, especially right now. What you used to be able to say to a woman to get a date, that might land you in jail now. Right? So males don't know how to approach women. You have to be feminine. Be more sensitive. You have to cry. Well, if I don't feel like crying, that means I can't get a girl. So they get stuck. And that's the group that's being targeted. Why? Because they see the influx of minorities coming to the United States, and where it was the idea of what it meant to be American, that was your status. But that's changing. That's changing. You no longer have the same status that you did. Not necessarily about racism, it's about status. So is racism about status? Or are you depressed and frustrated? Because you're depressed. So we're going to take just 3 minutes for your elbow partner. Answer this one question. We're going to take 2 minutes to think. And I'm going to ask for a few volunteers to tell me what your conversation. So 1 minute for you to think. It's going to take a couple minutes for you to think about it. Then one of you are going to respond. And then the person next to you is going to respond. And then we're going to share out. And the question that we're going to ask, how does a belief system guide the relationship between race and status? Go. I'll put the mic in the partner. Okay, let's come back together. So, whom would like to share out their thoughts about the relationship between belief system and status? And what does that have to do with race? She nominated you. This is a new world now. We're listening to her.
Well, I don't know if this is right, but I kind of have an example of this. Like, I guess from a black person, they have like higher standards for themselves and like higher goals, like the same type of goals you'll see in like a black person. I think that race can really play a factor into how they like run their belief system, but their status would be more of a factor in how they like coordinate those things.
That was good. That was good. I was very well. That as you were talking, I understood everything you said. Whom else would like to share? Should I stay on this side? Whom else would? Yes.
My friend who had to leave because he had another appointment pointed out that, and let me say that before this, I would say the belief system is everything. The belief system is everything that guides this relationship between race and status. However, in my experience the last decade, I've watched belief systems that say one thing that seem to contradict their attitudes toward race and status. And as we talked a little bit, I think the primary factor of belief system is what I believe about myself and and I think maybe I didn't hear it on really well because I believe years and I was listening to rock music when I was a kid. So he may have been saying this very thing, but what I believe about myself, and whether it's about my race or whatever, what I believe about myself determines how I deal with race and status.
You know, that's, I'm trying to listen too, so I'm going to hold the mic so everyone can hear you.
Just following up what Dr. Kono said, that an individual that grow with a specific type of belief system, and they go further into their lives and everything, they take and carry that belief system in a lot of things that they do. So, I mean, just using myself as an example, I grew up in a place where you think that racism and that type of stuff didn't exist because every kind of race that kind of exists is with Detroit. So, however, I sat down and spoke and had several conversations and everything. And one famous thing was that I got personally in my life that because I wasn't associated with the white people, I didn't come from money. Because I wasn't associated with the Asian people, I wasn't smart. Because I wasn't associated with the typical black guys that did basketball and sports, I wasn't like the other black people. So I didn't really have a system in which I normally fell in. So I had to create my own little bubble. And when it came down to me developing my own belief system, you eventually became a person of everyone, accepting everyone. I mean, that's what Christ calls us to do. But you'd be surprised that in everything that everyone does, there is a belief system behind how you treat a person based upon their status. And sometimes that status, you automatically put a understanding of race on top of it. I believe that applies for everyone in everything they do. And may it be subtle or may it be huge and detrimental to some people's lives, it still plays a role.
Thank you. That was excellent. We're going to move on. We're going to move on. We're going to allow some other folks to talk as we move on. So, how many of you have heard of PTSD? Okay. Now, my dad, I think, hope no one sees this because I don't want my dad to hear me. I don't want to secret it out. I think my dad has PTSD, and I think that manifested in his sleep apnea. Right? All things considered, my dad has handled it very well. Right? So I think most of us have been around or have seen someone or know someone who's been involved in PTSD. Well, I want to give you a slightly different one, okay? There's something called post-traumatic slave syndrome, all right, which is very similar. So it's, in essence, the short version is those who were slaves had post-traumatic stress disorder from being in slavery, and that's been passed down through their children, right? So that's the thing. So once you kind of think of it that way, you can see how that exists. So post-traumatic slave syndrome or post-traumatic slave disorder, those two things kind of go together, right? So it's a racial memory, right, that affects. And so when we talk about depression, because PTSD is highly linked to depression, right? So how did the relationship between that and status? Because you were a soldier and you thought you could make change, and then all of a sudden you are in a situation where you have no control over yourself, what happens to yourself or other people. And so this kind of affects you over and over and over again, right? Let's put a pin on this and come back. One of my favorite artists is a guy named Romare Bearden. Romare Bearden has a niece. She's also an artist, and she does truth, racial healing, and things like that with her artwork. And one of her paintings, this isn't it, but it's very similar. It's a painting called Southern White Woman. And it's a picture of a white woman in the South looking out of a window. She has a bunch of pictures all around. She takes these kids through, holds their hands. And she goes by the picture of the Southern white woman. Let me get out of the way so you can see that. And his children ask her, why is she so sad? And she says, she's sad because she's looking out of the window at children that look like her husband that she did not give birth to. So the thinking behind this is a really key component to PTSD or PTSS. Those who have been affected by post-traumatic slave syndrome aren't just blacks. So we all know that a parent who's an alcoholic has detrimental effects to the children in the home, right? Alcoholism is something that has usually been, if I remember correctly, can be traced down through the male, right? So let's take this one step further. What has happened to the psyche of the young white women whose father was a slave owner, when they see their father go rape white women, go rape black women, excuse me. What is this? What has happened over a long period of time about young white males who have seen their father go and rape black women? And now they have a brother that looks like them, but they're not allowed to play with. So for healing to begin, we have to bring up these issues. We got to talk about it. We got to make it real. We have to use the language, because we can't have transformation and we can't have reconciliation until people's stories, because we talked about just a little bit ago, people's stories of their communities are important. So your next question. What group is missing in conversations about healing? What group is missing in conversations about healing? Let's take 2 minutes. Does anyone need a partner? Okay, let's come back together. Come back together. Okay, so who would like to share something out that may not have had a chance to speak before? I'm going to hold the mic for you, okay? So everyone can.
So we talked about how third-party observers aren't, who are observe the the issues but aren't necessarily a part of it, and also the persecutors who are also, they also have a story, and the secondary persecuted, like you were talking about, who weren't exactly persecuted or directly persecuted, but have been passed down that belief system, that mindset of being persecuted.
So you're talking about everyone, all the agents in that action. Well, this is especially relevant for black women, because for black women, not necessarily white women, what the research says is that watching a traumatic event is more detrimental than actually experiencing it for African American women. So I'll repeat that again. Watching or witnessing a traumatic event is worse than actually being the victim of that for African American women, not necessarily for white women. So in other words, all of the agents in that scene need healing. Someone else has something they would like to share. I'm going here because I don't think we've had a chance. You don't have to share. I just want to make sure I'm making the opportunity open for it.
We talked about the third party as well, but we also talked about the idea that we kind of ignore the past as well. So I think that the group of people that are, what group is missing in a conversation about healing is people from the past and how to reconcile our nation's history versus just focusing on the future better.
That's deep. Because one of the things especially relevant this month is Black History Month is paying attention to the ancestors, right? And so going back, that's a bit of Sankofa, looking over your shoulder, right? And remembering the past to inform the future. That's really good. I see I'm gonna go over here and see if there's anyone who wants to respond. And then, okay, so was anyone over here who would like to respond? You don't have to, but if you would like to share out, you're welcome to. Okay. I'm gonna hold the mic for you.
I think I'm pretty loud enough.
We're using the mics so that the volume is loud enough for the camera, okay, not just.
Okay, so we kind of talked about like when 9/11 happened, like a lot of like Middle Eastern people like experienced that. They were a part of it, but experienced it, like you just said. So that's the group that we're kind of focusing on.
Okay. And so they need what? What is the focus of that group that you talked about? So I got you. See, 9/11, Middle Eastern. So how does that play a role into what group is missing in conversations about healing? What did you talk about? Someone want to give us support? I didn't mean to put you on the spot. You articulated, so you articulated what the topic was. All right, so what's the next part? I'll hold it.
Okay.
Maybe not, I'll let you hold it. Okay.
I was thinking maybe after it happened, a lot of people from the Middle Eastern parts of the world, and a lot of people who just had dark hair or like dark skin, they kind of like stereotyped. I know my teacher from high school, like when he went to the airport, they pulled him back to make sure that he wasn't like a terrorist or something. It's just like the labels that they put on him because of what those few people did in that incident.
So the thinking behind it is people focus, and rightly so, on the victims of 9/11 in the tower, right? But for all of the folks that look like the folks who brought the towers down were affected as well. It's kind of like a ripple effect. So, moving on. Give you another term. We academics like to use these big terms. something called terror management theory. Oh, you're right, that was me. Okay. Terror management theory. Terror management theory posits that when people are reminded of extreme change, such as the change of social roles or even death, they turn to extremes to protect themselves. So how does that play a role in what we're talking about? So in my mind, when we talk about conversations about healing, how many times have we talked about that in the United States, when we talk about racial healing, how many times have we remembered or thought about or mentioned that white people may need healing? Right. I think that's important too. Another group that has been left out, that white male, or that group of white males that have been attracted to alt-right, and not because of overt racism or the targeting and messaging towards them about racism. That's a group that's been left out. And that's wanting to have a sense of belonging, clearly defined rules, expectations, right? That same thing that attracts black males to A, either sports, or B, to join gangs. Those are the same things that have been attracting those white males to alt-right, the group that's been left behind. And so when you have fear, depression, anxiety, low status, those things are running together. And so when you have fear, stress, it makes you act irrationally. That's the thinking behind terror management theory. Wasn't invented after the towers, but that's an example of terror management theory. It's kind of like, that person has a turban, get him off the plane. One of my senseis is a very dark Italian guy, right, with a beard like yourself, sir. He says that he couldn't get on that plane. Even though he's Italian, he's a dark-skinned Italian with a beard. He said when he got on the plane the first time, he said he realized what happened the second time, he shaved his beard off just so he could get on the plane. That's an example of having it, maybe not too irrational, but an irrational experience, irrational behavior based on extreme fear. That extreme fear is lack or the fear of change, or a better term, a fear of status, or fear of losing status, or fear of change. Because what does change represents? It represents a loss of yourself and your belief system, because your belief system has changed. Right now, we all have a belief system, and our behavior is that we're in a safe environment. Okay? Everyone close your eyes right now real quick. How many of you can tell me what the color of the walls are? Just a couple. Because we're in a safe environment, because you can open your eyes now. We're in a safe environment, so we as human beings can't pay attention to everything in the room. I can't pay attention to this person, this chair, the light, the wall, the TV, this guy talking, the books, everything, the photo, right? You have, you know what? Nothing is moving, nothing's coming at me, nothing's trying to attack me. I kind of relax. My identity, I'm part of a community, that I'm a student, we're okay. But if all of a sudden, if you stood up and said, hey, and screamed and ran around the circle, right? Oh my God, something's changed, so then we pay attention to it. So what happens when you have that fear, your body goes into hyper-awareness, what people call flight or fight. You're paying attention to everything, that's why time slows down. And neurologically what happens is it sucks all of the energy out of your brain, right? It takes all of those axons and all of those synapses are firing in ways that it hasn't fired before, because you can't continuously live like that. And that affects your body. Right? So that's part of PTSD, part of stress. All of those things are starting to play a role. So fear. One of the things that happened in the United States that you may or may not have gotten information about when you were in K through 12 was that it wasn't just white folks that had slaves and blacks were slaves. There were a tiny, small majority of white folks who had slaves. Most of the time during slavery, the average white person wasn't better off than a slave, because there was a small group of white folks that ripped everybody off. Okay, that small group of white folks, right? We've seen those graphics, those YouTube videos. It's a small select group of folks that own all the money. It's not all white people that have money. It's a small group of white folks that have all the money, right? It's the same group. So what they did to make sure things stayed the same is they went and they said, okay, you may be white. You may be white, but you're not this guy. He's the N-word. Status. Status. And so, what is it between the poor folks in Alabama and the poor blacks in Alabama? Why don't they get together and march on Congress together? Why don't they vote the same? They would have more numbers, right? But what happens, some are prevented from joining unions. Some are prevented from voting. Why? Well, you may not have more money, but at least you're not black. So if we look at a couple events here, I need to preface this. This guy named Newton Knight. How many of you saw the movie, The Free State of Jones? Right? Any of you saw that movie? That was about a rebellion by a white guy and some black slaves. And they was trying to get some stuff jumping off during the Civil War time, and they were trying to hold it down till the Union Army came, right? And they were fighting the Confederates, right? That's one. There was another rebellion by a black guy, Nathan Bacon, Bacon's Rebellion, right? And that was the story. What would have happened in the United States if the poor whites, the former black slaves, and the current slaves got together and won? Take 2 minutes.
Because the problem is not necessarily mindset. And so if they kind of thoughts,
because they can be friends, and so the phone would be sold by maybe the rich and friends. If we're holding up for obviously we're representation. If everybody's going in the same direction, or so just
because if you have countries around and breakfast so forces is actually I believe we could have
Think about it, we have none of that in our industry. You know how much effort
Instead of
goes
now,
into
we're
those
focused on kite lines. I'm still astonished.
Okay, let's come back together. And let's come back together. I see your hand. Is there anyone who would like to answer this third question that has not had a chance to share out before? You don't have to. Just want to make sure that we're all open for the opportunity and we're here to receive what you have to say. Okay, I'm going to go to this young brother who had his hand up first. Yes, sir. Wait, I need to come with the mic.
Gotcha. Personally, I believe that America, we would have developed on our own fast track because this takes away the authority of the leading forces that kind of build a nation in separation and division. The dominant forces at the time were obviously oligarchies that ran the different industries of America. So what they did is that, like how you spoken, they brought division into the lower class people to keep an additional layer of bondage on minorities in the United States from progressing. But if that was never established with the with the Free State of Jones and the Bacon's Rebellion, if those were successful, that will cause that wall to be actually torn down between those communities. And I believe it would be a bonding time between the two individuals. And they bond so much, in my opinion, because they would relate so much at the time. It wouldn't be verbatim brother to brother like how we see each other nowadays, but it'd be a very fair and very honest community that they would end up fighting for peace and progression in their communities. Therefore, eventually, the individuals that have built the system against them would be overturned. And in fact, if it was overturned then, I believe we'd be more like, if I could say, Britain, Canada, where the developments on the nation will be a lot more focused on an individual's character, and more focused on an individual's heart and what that individual did in their lives versus the countless years and efforts of separation and based on race.
Thank you. Wow, that was pretty good. That was good analysis. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we started just a little bit late. Got one more question for you. If you all can work with me, I can get us out in 12 minutes. Does that work? And that would give us the same amount of time that was allotted, although we started late, and we would have the same amount of time and not have actually gone overtime. Same amount. Does that make sense? So one more question, we can work with me? All right. Now, the reason why I'm segueing now, because that leads into our next question. You're going to laugh when you see this. What would reconciliation look like in your community? Now, we're going to take 5 minutes to discuss. Okay? We're going to take 5 minutes to discuss, and then each of you can share out. Why don't you just take one sentence, and then that way everyone can get a response. Your question.
About community, like our community at home or at school.
Ooh, but we already talked about what community is. So that's a good question. So in other words, I don't want to answer that question for you. So we had a little discussion about community, right? Who remembers what we talked about with community?
said, man, welcome.
There we go. So in this particular context, for this frame of reference, your community would be where you feel welcome. So, what would reconciliation look like in your community? 5 minutes. We have about a minute and a half. A minute and a half.
What's your first action?
Yeah, that's fun.
Okay, we have 1 minute before we come back together. You're welcome to join us, young lady.
She's at class.
Oh, I'm in a 4-hour accounting night class right now, but
CPA.
Then you should really stay.
if you want to just like
We're
shoot
gonna
my
reconcile.
professor an email.
We're gonna reconcile the bottom line.
Oh my goodness.
That's CPA prep, that's what we do.
Okay, let's come back together. All back together? Okay, so we will do a rapid response. Anyone who wants to respond is welcome to respond, but you must make your response in 1 minute. And the response is to what would reconciliation look like in your community? Who would like to start? So 1 sentence.
Oh, wow, that's almost there.
1 sentence. We did say 1 sentence earlier, so 1 sentence.
I gotta get it on.
Well, that way we can get everybody to respond, and then I want to make sure everyone got a chance to respond, and then we can leave on time.
I'll give a second.
I'll be one of the
Okay.
Reconciliation in our community would be advocating for someone we don't have the same beliefs with nor look like.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. Yeah, follow that.
Well,
We'll come back.
Reconciliation is not seeking retribution for wrongdoing or for receiving the wrongdoing of another individual and forgiving the individual to reconcile or to reconnect.
All right, so we're going to go 1 sentence really quick. Yes, sir.
Oh,
Good night, folks.
all right.
Reconciliation looks like clear communication in the direction of understanding, not in necessarily of agreement, but of where each other stands.
Thank you.
I believe reconciliation also, I can say, starts with acknowledgement that there's a need to be reconciled.
Well, that, yeah. No, you got this on tape? Yeah, okay. You don't have to respond.
No, I definitely will.
Okay.
I just feel like it's like a willingness to change and communicate with people.
Willingness to change and communicate with people. Yes. You don't have to respond, but you're welcome to.
If one in one sentence.
Just 1 sentence. Make it. You can do it. I have faith in you.
Reconciliation looks like invite a stranger to dinner.
Ooh, I like that. You're worried about 1 sentence.
Seeing the beauty in everyone and it's not about labeling people.
I guess in my community, I say less of a division between people.
It's being empathetic to those with differences than ourselves.
Being willing to be uncomfortable to extend the community to others. Overcoming unspoken groups to overcome reservations. What do you interact with the community?
I think there needs to be a recognition that we're all human beings, and I just lost my train of thought.
Well, that was good. You can start. That's good. Recognize that we're all human beings. That's good. You're welcome to continue, but that was good. Okay.
A willingness to listen and to agree to disagree.
I would say it starts with the removal of our pride and removal of the spirit of fear.
The ability to keep an open mind and to know that your ideas and influences aren't the only ideas and influences.
A willingness to apologize and forgive.
Wow. Okay, so keeping my promise to get us out on time, can I get everybody to stand up? And we're gonna make a circle, hold hands. Okay, so very quickly, repeat after me. And look at someone next to you. Thank you for coming and sharing your heart.